Welcome back. Tonight we have new details for you in our special investigation into the origins of the pandemic. We're doing this because no one else is doing it properly. No one in the media, no one in our government, certainly not the WHO. And as we've said from the start, our investigation is not about pointing blame, but making sure we learn lessons to prevent the next pandemic. Now, there are two aspects to this story. One, did the virus leak from a lab in Wuhan? When this was first suggested, it was dismissed as a conspiracy theory. Now it's moving close to being the mainstream consensus. The Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, numerous other publications have since reported on the very details we brought to you in January. But the second aspect is perhaps even more troubling because it involves not the Chinese regime, no surprise they'd be engaged in denial, cover-up and misinformation, but our own government. It centers on the question of what exactly leaked from the Wuhan lab and why it was there. As we've laid out for you, there are reasonable grounds to suspect that SARS-CoV-2, the pandemic virus, which may have leaked accidentally, was the product of genetic experiments commissioned and funded by our own government. And we have new information on that tonight. The type of research we're talking about is called gain-of-function virus research. It aims to take a virus and then manipulate its genetic code to make it stronger and more contagious. The virus would gain new functions, hence the name. The thinking goes, if we could engineer the most deadly viruses ourselves in lab conditions, we could better prepare our pandemic response. The risk, of course, is that the genetically engineered virus gets loose. That's why gain-of-function research has always been highly controversial, ever since it began around a decade ago. So, in July 2014, a group of scientists from around the world came together to voice their concerns. They set up the Cambridge Working Group, quote, to coordinate efforts to enhance public understanding of the biosafety risks of such research, appropriate scrutiny and evaluation of its purported scientific and public health benefits, and appropriate regulation of such experiments that emphasizes the use of safer approaches to meet the same public health and scientific goals. Look who some of the founding members were. Dr. Thomas Inglesby, a frequent face on this channel during the pandemic. Dr. Michael Osterholm, resident epidemiologist at NBC. Dr. David Relman, he was on Bill Nye's podcast not long ago calling for a forensic investigation into the Wuhan lab. They were among the founding signatories, but there are literally hundreds of top scientists who signed on because they had the same concerns. They specifically called for an end to such experiments until their risks and benefits and potential alternatives had been fully explored. And as we've reported, in 2014, the Obama administration did place a moratorium on this kind of research, quote, following recent biosafety incidents at federal research facilities. The moratorium was lifted in 2017. But as we've also reported, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, or NIAID, run then, as now, by Dr. Fauci, funded this research project just before the ban was imposed and continued to fund it for 6 years, 3 of those during the ban. The money from NIAID was awarded to EcoHealth Alliance, run by a man called Peter Daszak, who then subcontracted the research to Shi Zhengli, head of the Infectious Diseases Unit at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Based on our own sources in the scientific community, we told you that this part of the grant represented gain-of-function research, and that this progress report tied to the grant described gain-of-function research that they did in fact carry out. They analyzed bat coronaviruses and sequenced their genetic information. They then built various chimeras, genetically engineered new viruses, man-made in the lab. They infected human cells with them in the lab, and they then showed that their man-made viruses could replicate as a functional virus. Why is this so important? Because the closest known virus to the one which started the pandemic is a bat coronavirus that we know was in the Wuhan lab. They told us it was a 96% match. That original virus was found years before in a mine 1,000 miles from Wuhan, where 3 people were infected and later died from a new SARS-like respiratory illness. The only difference between that virus and the pandemic virus is how contagious it is. The pandemic virus, as we know, can be passed from human to human. The original virus could not. And that 4% genetic difference between them, it's in exactly the places where gain-of-function techniques would be used to make the virus more contagious. In technical language, the spike receptor binding domain and the furin cleavage site. So, while we can blame the Chinese regime for allowing the virus to leak, and especially for the cover-up afterwards, the terrifying truth may be that our own government commissioned the experiments that led to the creation of the pandemic virus in the first place. We've put all this to the National Institutes of Health, which oversees the NIAID, repeatedly, and they keep telling us the same thing. The grant that began in 2014 was not gain-of-function research, so it was not subject to the Obama administration's 2014 ban. So who's right? Well, we reached out to many of the scientists in the Cambridge Working Group. It's a long list, and we're still waiting for some replies, but we did hear back from dozens. Some disagreed with our sources that the 2014 grant and the 2017 study covered gain-of-function research. Many of them either didn't want to be quoted on the record or felt they weren't able to offer a view. But one of the most common things we heard back was, you should talk to Dr. Richard Ebright of Rutgers University. He's the real global expert on all this. So we did. And we greatly appreciate Dr. Ebright's help with this investigation. Here's what he told us. The original grant, in his view, was not gain-of-function research, but the project's renewal in 2019 unequivocally did include gain-of-function research of concern, his words, and should have been flagged for review. We've also been told that when researchers apply for grant renewals, they're often applying for retrospective approval, describing work they've already carried out or begun. The NIAID's renewal of this work in 2019, gain-of-function virus research of concern, according to one of the world's top experts in the field, was even closer to the outbreak of the pandemic. In case anyone at the NIH, its boss, Dr. Francis Collins, or NIAID's Dr. Fauci is watching, here's what we're going to do. Next week, we will ask you to respond directly to the new information we've reported tonight, that in 2019, you funded risky gain-of-function research involving bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a lab which our own government, the one you're part of, warned in 2018 had serious biosafety issues. The more we dig into this story, the more it looks as if we're right, that you commissioned the genetic experiments that led to the creation of SARS-CoV-2, the pandemic virus, in a lab. If we're wrong, please come on here and explain why. And for all of you watching, we will keep up the pressure until we get the answers all of us, the whole world, needs. Help us to do that by following us at Steve Hilton X and at NextRev FNC, and share this message when we post it.